Hello everyone, this is FPS Gamer, and today we are doing Let's Forge number 1. This is a forging session for a infection map that I'm creating called Crossroads. Now this map is called Crossroads. It's based off of a mall, not any mall in particular. I'm a big fan of zombie and infection, rage virus type movies. I love movies like Dawn of the Dead or 28 Days, 28 Weeks Later, and obviously The Walking Dead. And in a movie that I really like called Dawn of the Dead, it came out in 2004. It was a reboot of a movie that came out in 78, I think. And in this movie, Dawn of the Dead, the main characters get held up inside of a mall, and that mall is called, of course, Crossroads Mall, if you've seen the movie. Now, I was going to base this map off of that mall, more or less, but looking at the geometry, overlooking the footage of the mall, and also some Left 4 Dead footage, there's a mall in there as well, I discovered that that particular mall, and really malls in general, don't cater to the Halo-style infection. Now, to give you just a brief history of infection, for those of you that have been around for a long time in the Halo community, and by a long time I mean since the days of Halo 2 online, back in the day, there were a number of game types that the developers gave to us, but there wasn't anything like a DLC or content updates that got pushed out over your internet connection. Even though the technology was there, I think just culturally or habitually that just never really happened. Obviously, if there was a major bug fix needed to happen, they would change it. But other than that, they didn't push things out over your internet like they do today. For example, when the multiplayer map pack came out about halfway through Halo 2's life cycle, you had to physically go to the store and buy the physical disc that those maps came on. And I know for some of you that's probably a completely foreign concept, but that's what I did. I went to the store and had to buy that physical disc. And anyway, what I'm getting at is the game types you had in the game was what came with the game. New game types didn't come out over the life cycle of the game. And that's good and bad. Good and bad in that obviously what you have at launch is what you have for the duration of the title. And good in the fact that back in the day you actually got a complete game. I think nowadays developers have gotten in this habit of pushing out unfinished games that are kind of bare bones and relied very heavily on these content updates to give us the rest of the content. So you can like it or not, but that's kind of how things are done now. So anyway, back to my original point. You didn't have an infection game type. You didn't have a lot of game types that we currently have. And a lot of game types that we currently have were thought up by the community. For example, infection. There was one map in Halo 2 called Foundation. Now, Foundation was kind of like a testbed map. It was a medium small map, very open. It didn't have a lot of cover. It was symmetrical on all four sides. It had 4 rooms. In each corner there was a room, and there was only one way in or out, which typically is kind of a no-no in map design, but not always. In this instance, it kind of worked. And then the center basin area was very open, and you can shoot across the map from there. And it wasn't a very competitive map. You didn't ever see it online, hardly ever, if ever, because it wasn't very competitive. It wasn't like an arena-style map that is what comes to mind now when you hear arena map. It had a lot of faults, we'll just say that. However, that being said, that particular map was the breeding ground for a game type that the community developed called zombies. Now, the game type was very simple. You had a red team and a green team. And you started off with one green guy and however many red guys you can fit into your party. And the red guy used a sword. You had a pistol, I think you had a pistol. I'm trying to remember. I think you had a shotgun and a sword. I'm pretty sure is what it was. And maybe pistols on the map. And it was completely honor rules based. And back in the day, you could have successful honor rules games. People just kind of followed the rules back then. Maybe I'm remembering it differently, but I seem to recall back in the day, you would come up with these community made creations and game types, and you would just explain the rules in the lobby, and everyone would obey the rules. Now I think the community is a little bit less mature, a little younger. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but you can't really have these honor rules games unless you have a particularly mature party who is going to listen and obey the rules. Back in the day, it was kind of just unspoken. You just obeyed the rules, whatever they were, because there weren't any content updates. You couldn't expect any new game types to come out. If you wanted to play something new and fresh, you had to come up with it yourself, and you had to depend on everyone in your party to follow whatever the predetermined rules were. So, the rules are pretty simple. You start off with a sword and a shotgun. The green guy uses a sword. Red guys aren't allowed to use the sword. Green guys aren't allowed to use anything but the sword. And obviously, if a green guy kills you, you switch over to green team. And you had to go in manually, hit start, change team, switch over to green. And that's how the game was played. That's how Zombies was born. And essentially what you would do is hide out in one of these 4 rooms in the corner and wait for the infected to come to you. Now, there's this, what I call in infection, the snowball effect, which is exactly what it sounds like. The first few minutes of the game are a little bit slow because you have most of the entire game is on the same team. You only have 1 or 2 guys who are on the other team. So you're not going to encounter very much altercation. There's not going to be much fighting. So what happens is the humans tend to be a little bit more advantageous. They actually will start off the game having this tendency to go and attack and find zombies because there's nothing going on. People are getting kind of antsy, right? But then something happens. You get a little bit careless as a human. You're exposed. You're increasing your chances of a zombie infecting you, and eventually it happens. One person gets infected. Well, now that there's more than one person that's infected, that really changes the game because you have to be constantly looking for an infected player from 2 different locations. And that second player, it's kind of a jump. It takes a long time to get from 1 player to 2 players on the infected side. That's why a lot of match-made infection games start with a minimum of 2 zombies. Because if you only have 1, it can be very difficult to get that first kill. If you have 2, it's still difficult, but if you stick together, you can manage to kill 1 or 2 humans in one go. And that's what happens. And if you have an organized, or at least somewhat organized, infected team, they at least rush together. It can be extremely lethal. And that was the case with this particular map. You'd be hiding in one of these rooms, and all the infected would gather on the exterior of the room and then flood in all at once. And you would take out, the first 70% of the wave of zombies would die, and it would be up to the last 2 or 3 in the back of the pack to get 1 or 2 kills against the humans that are all huddled on the back wall. And every wave you would pick off more and more and more until at the end it was just you and your buddy and 14 infected players outside of the room that all flood in, and you're going to die, and you and your friend are just screaming and firing away at these zombies and basically killing as many as you can before they get to you. And it was absolutely a blast. And obviously it got popular enough that the development team noticed it, and what did we get in Halo 3? We got Infection, which was a dedicated game type that changed your team when you died by an infected player. And they added a few other cool features that made making an infected game type fun. And with Forge, obviously, that was kind of the birth of infection maps. And that's kind of what I wanted to get to during this live stream, was infection maps. Now, infection maps are a very different breed of map. There are players who make racetracks. There are players who make arena maps. There's some players, some forgers who will kind of do a little bit of everything. That's kind of where I am. I don't really do racetracks. It's the only thing I don't really do. I obviously have a great respect for people that make them. It's not something I really enjoy. And it's not something I'm very good at, so I don't really make very many. But what I did used to do a lot, especially in Halo Reach, were infection maps, and they're a whole different breed of map. You can have a map that is designed for CTF, but it's probably going to play well with Slayer. It's probably going to play well with Assault or other game types. A lot of these things that work well in the map transfer over from game type to game type. That being said, Infection does not. Infection is very unique in that the map has to be designed in kind of a specific way. Now, the way infection maps go, they're a little bit more of a social thing. They're not super competitive. You won't typically see a ranked infection playlist like you will with Slayer or Capture the Flag or something. You'll really not see something that's an infected ranked playlist or something, because it's traditionally more social. And it's a little goofier. You'll have these infection maps that are really aesthetic and kind of goofy, but they still kind of follow these basic rules. And the rules for making an infection map aren't as, I guess, strict as, let's say, for example, an Arena Slayer map. The rules don't have to be followed to a T as much. That being said, there are a few things you want to always have in mind if you're making a map that's specific for infection. Not to say that current Arena maps won't work for infection. Some of them might. But the infection playlist is one that can benefit greatly from player-made creations, because they have to be designed so specifically to function well in infection. You have this element of an infection game that doesn't really exist in any other game type, where the first half of the game, one team is bigger than the other, and the second half, another team is bigger than the other. So you have to have a map that is flexible and can hold a large number of humans at the beginning of the map, but also provide a smaller space for a smaller number of humans to defend near the closing moments of the match. Again, you can interpret that however you want. Essentially, just take away from this that an infection map has to be flexible. It has to be able to cater to a large team, and then later on during the game, a much smaller team. If you only have these big rooms for large numbers of people, it's actually going to really only benefit the humans at that point. The bigger the spaces are, the harder it is for an infected player to kill a human player. And that kind of goes without saying, and it sounds obvious, but you kind of lose track of that when you're designing a map, because you're thinking about how you design an Arena Slayer map. You're like, oh, it's balanced because this team has this sight line and this point of view, and this team has this geometry that kind of balances that out. But that doesn't really work in infection, because one team has a longer range weapon. Traditionally it's a shotgun and a pistol, but now they've kind of allowed players to use whatever weapon, really. But that even further accentuates this point that you have one team who can only use really the closest range weapon in the game, and another team who can use a close range weapon and also a long range weapon. So at range, the infected don't have any chance of killing a human. If you only have these big spaces, that those first few kills, that snowball effect I was talking about, is going to happen too late in the game. It's not going to happen at all. You're never going to get that first kill or first couple kills. Now, a perfect infection map is one where consistently every single game there's only a couple of humans left in the closing moments of the game. I'd say a minute or less. It's down to maybe last man standing, or just one or two people. And if your map does that consistently, like every single game you're getting to that point, then you're good. That is a really solid infection map, because you want that to happen. You want players to have fun both as the infected and as the human. And if the map is designed in a way that snowball effect doesn't happen until several minutes into the game, you're kind of wasting that first half of the match. The zombies aren't having any fun because they're just getting killed repetitiously without any reward. And the humans aren't having any fun because there's no one to shoot. There's, 12 of them or 14 of them, and only every 30 seconds or so, when a zombie comes and gets killed and has to go respawn and come back, one person gets a kill. But it's boring. It's boring for the humans, and it's frustrating for the zombies. On the flip side, if there's a ton of really close, tight spaces, it's much easier for the infected to get to the human. Now, the humans have the advantage in most situations because they can shoot the zombies at a range that they can't retaliate. But if you have a map that's too condensed, there's no sight line is longer than 20 or 30 feet, then that's going to cater a little bit too strongly toward the zombies, and that snowball effect is actually going to happen too soon. Right when the game starts, you're going to see your teammates falling left and right, and the match is going to be over a minute or two in when everyone gets infected, and there's no holdout places. There's no place to fortify yourself and to retaliate and to defend yourself against the infected. So a good map, that snowball effect is going to be gradual. It's going to start fairly early on, not too early on. I'd say a minute or two into the match, you'll get that first couple kills, and it will happen gradually. It's not going to just be like a sudden flip of a switch. It'll be this gradual acceleration of kills. And that's what I'm trying to accomplish with this map here. I have these center walkways that provide some long sight lines. So in order to navigate in between these different rooms, you have to pass through these longer sight lines. You have to pass through these center areas. So you want to have a place for the different... People play Infection different ways. There are some players who, as humans, try to get a lot of kills. They'll expose themselves. They'll be out in the open. They know they're probably going to die. They're not going to be the last man standing, but they don't care. They just want to kill as many zombies as they can before they inevitably become one. Then you have the players who, and this is kind of more the way I play, who want to outlast the zombies. They want to last to the end of the match. Even if they don't get any kills, it's complete survival mode for them. So you kind of have these different play styles, and you want to have a map that, again, will cater to these different play styles. So Foundation, obviously when the creators designed the map, they didn't have Infection in mind, but it actually plays really well in this regard because it has these walkways that can see across for these longer sight lines, but you're also extremely exposed. If you stand out there trying to pick off zombies one by one, you're only going to last a minute or two before you inevitably get infected because there's really nowhere for you to go. Anyway, you have a spot for those players that want to get a lot of kills. The zombies eventually catch on. They rush the guy, and he's dead. And he's not going to last to the end of the match, and he knows he's not going to last, but it's still fun for him anyway. Then you have these rooms, right, where players can defend themselves. And this is where you'll find players like myself who enjoy more that survival type of game where they're hiding and waiting for the infected to come, and just trying to be the last man standing or to survive the entire round. And as the game progresses, it starts off kind of like everyone's playing more toward this really aggressive style because there's not a lot of action going on because there's only a handful of zombies and there's not very many of them. But then as the game progresses, you start seeing your buddies die one by one, and you kind of panic a little bit. You're like, okay, the zombies currently outnumber us. I need to move. And you have to have a map that will allow them to do that, to move from a more exposed area where they're getting kills to now a more secluded, more easily defendable area where you can hold out with a few of your buddies and try to last to the end of the round. So that's what I was really going for in this map. I thought a mall would be a good way to do that. It turns out that malls are a little bit too exposed, so the proportions of this may look a little funny. It's probably not like any mall that actually exists because it's kind of stubby, but that's intentionally to kind of even the playing field. Now, Infection maps differ again from more arena style maps because they rely so heavily on playtesting. It's difficult to get that snowball effect to happen at the right time during a game. It's difficult to get that snowball effect to happen during the right time in a game. It takes a lot of playtesting and tweaking and adding cover, removing cover, expanding or contracting different rooms, deciding on, in more modern Halo, with your weapon placements, if you're not doing the traditional, shotgun and pistol, you have to keep in mind that it's going to take some playtesting. And this can be a little bit difficult because traditionally, infection maps have a larger party count. It's typically more fun when you have, parties of 10 or more, usually. No, that's not always the case, but, you don't really see infection maps that play, with like 4 players or even like 8 players. A little bit, but not as much. For me, at least, it seems like it's more fun when you have larger teams and you get that massive horde of zombies near the end of the game. I just think it's a lot of fun. I love Infection. I'm so excited that it's coming back. I'm very excited for this map to be released. As you can see, I'm about halfway through my piece count. The geometry of the map and some of the finer details are out of the way, so I think I'm going to be okay on piece count depending on how heavy I get on the aesthetics in this one. But if you like this video and you want to hear more design talk videos in this regard, go ahead and let me know in the comments below. Infection is one that I'm pretty well versed in. I wouldn't feel comfortable discussing this much if I were talking about like Arena or like Big Team or some other racetracks. I'm not as well versed in that. However, I've been making Infection maps for a long time. I've been playing Infection for over a decade now, since it was in its infancy, since its conception, when it was just a group of people who randomly kind of came up with this idea and just obeyed honor rules. So I'm comfortable saying I'm well versed in the Infection game mode. But again, if you want to see more videos like this, let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.